Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Leadership in Focus, where I have the privilege of being joined by Luke Wilde, the founder and CEO of 2050. Luke, I had the privilege of meeting you right here in Montenegro, I think it was 2 years ago. And we had a lovely dinner, and you told me all about the fascinating work that you do. And so just to kick things off, I was wondering if you could explain, what 2050 is, why you chose that name, and what is the work that you do around the world for our audience.
Yeah, certainly, for sure. So 2050 is a business consultancy which I founded in 2004, probably a little bit before its time, if I'm honest. And our focus is on corporate responsibility and particularly on how businesses respect human rights. And what we've seen in the years since 2004 has been the development of international principles, an increasing amount of legislation which is requiring companies to identify and address their impacts on human rights. So most lately perhaps is the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive from the European Union, but we also have the UK Modern Slavery Act. We have legislation in the US that is designed to prevent goods made with forced labour coming into the US. So there's quite a wide range now, across many countries across the world, and we even see that those policy developments growing into the kind of what we know as the emerging markets and some of the Asian economies as well. I mean, what does that look like for us in practice as to how we work as a business? Well, we are a team of about 45 people who work with often the largest multinationals. And we're often helping them to look at their supply chains, where they're sourcing products from. We might be looking at who they're selling to as well. So, there is a fair amount of headquarters policy and practice, but perhaps some of the work that most excites and feeds us will be the work that sees us sort of digging into their supply chains, understanding where the nickel comes from that goes into the batteries of the cars that we're now buying in Europe, and the conditions in which that nickel is being mined and the consequences of that mining on the local communities, for example. Or another example could be that we'll be looking at agriculture. We do a lot of work around agricultural products. So we might be looking at something like jasmine and the conditions in which jasmine is farmed in Egypt, for example, whether children are involved, the role of women within the agricultural system. And then we'll be working with companies to understand how they can secure sort of internationally acceptable labour standards in those supply chains, how they can encourage better women empowerment, and how that actually improves the resilience of that supply chain for them. I mean, that's particularly important in this time where we see, particularly in agriculture, the impacts of the changing climate on farming communities all around the world.
Yeah. And you started in 2004. The company's grounded in this idea of 2050.
Yeah.
Sounds like you're just about almost halfway through that timeline. And the world has changed massively.
Yes.
Since 2004. I mean, you started this, pre-financial crisis,
Yes.
pre-Donald Trump, pre-pandemic.
Yes.
Talk to me a bit about those major shifts and how they've changed your expectations around how businesses engage with these issues.
Yeah. So, I think thinking about so one of the biggest shifts was around the COVID lockdowns and the period of the pandemic. I think what we saw then, while we already had the emergence of the legislation that I've been talking about before, that was already arriving. But I think what we saw during that lockdown was it was almost like business leaders had a chance to step back, to sit down and think about purpose and think about what they're in business for and what they want to achieve through leading their business. And I think coming out of that, we saw a stronger engagement with questions of sustainability and sustainable development and responsible business practices, and what does that look like in practice. So I think that was very definitely, we saw a big surge of interest in development. I think in the last 2 years, that's been less pronounced, more muted. Without a doubt, the kind of US angle on, cutting back on public statements about diversity, for example, has had an impact. It's caused business leaders to take stock about how much they're prepared to say, to put their neck out, to stand up and look forward. We've seen, the shift in politics in Europe, broadly towards a more of a right-wing agenda, has caused quite a lot of reconsideration and re-debate of some of the European legislation, and that, and delay to that legislation coming and having effect. It's not overall necessarily a bad thing. I think that the legislation is coming, has matured. It is more realistic. It is better for businesses to implement. But the delay has meant that it's taken, in a sense, it's taken some of the visible pressure off of businesses. And the other thing which is definitely been significant over the last 12 months is the trading challenges around tariffs, and then the advent of the recent Middle Eastern affairs and the disruption to supply chains. Again, after the pandemic era, disruption to supply chains means that our clients, big companies, are very focused on kind of operational issues, on trading issues, on how they're going to get their product to the shelves on an ongoing basis, facing increased energy costs. So the realities of just doing business these days seem to have got harder and harder progressively, I would say, since 2008 for our clients, and they, and that also then has a knock-on impact on us.
Yeah. And I imagine you have to work in some pretty challenging parts of the world, on issues that are contemporarily, always in the media. Working on things like that, what are the things that, if you had to pick one or two stories, perhaps, what's something that made you most pessimistic about the field that you're working in? But also, what's one story or one moment where you felt the most hopeful for the work that you're doing?
I mean, one of the, I think, I could talk about some of the work that we've done with our partner Yiva in Myanmar, where we've worked with several large companies that are present in Myanmar. We've looked at their own operations, their supply chains, their often their delivery systems to get their product out to their clients. And, it's a good example of a country where, you go through these sort of cycles of hope, and then it gets damned. And, there was the period of hope before the military stepped back into power, which I think everyone hoped this was a transition in the country towards a long-term democracy, and where we would see economic development and growth. And then, the current phase, and what we've been working with our clients on is, how do they avoid becoming complicit in some of the harms that are being committed in a time of civil war. Mm-hmm. So I think, what we often find, and the hope comes from, virtually everywhere I go, I meet people who want to run their businesses well, who want to, earn the respect of the communities in which they operate, who, bear no harm to those in their operations and supply chains. They often lack, the measures, the ways of assessing whether that is truly the case or not, and that's what we're helping them with. Yeah. So there's always hope in these things, but I suppose the things that I see more and more that knock our clients from doing what they intend to do well is the instability in governance. And I think, what we're often seeing in the world these days is that instability is brought about by, particular large global, if you like, the new power brokers in the world, and the new powerful in the world, and their conflicts.
Yeah.
Probably the most disappointing thing was that I, in very positive enthusiasm, on the 27th of January 2022, we launched 2050 to an audience of businesses in Ukraine with the intention of working in Ukraine to help those businesses develop and grow their responsible business practices with the Ukraine on the trajectory towards the European Union, working with a local partner, Kirill, and you know, what was it, 22 days later, less than 30 days later, of course, the invasion happened. And so that's a really good example where, hopes and aspirations got fairly firmly damned for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. Yeah. And the podcast is called Leadership in Focus. I have to ask you, from your vantage point, you meet so many leaders that with so many different kinds of leadership styles operating in entirely different, political environments. Yeah. What have you learned from those leaders that you wouldn't have had you only worked in, say, the UK or in Western Europe?
I mean, I think that these times call for, leaders they're often in a formal structural position, but the reality is they are still leaders of people, and are always leaders of people. And to be a leader of people, you have to know yourself. And I think probably over the last decade or so, the need for leaders to find ways and times to keep orientating themselves to who they truly are is probably the thing that sort of stands out for me. And everyone's an individual, and they'll do that in different ways, and they'll find their own ways to do that. But I think that's perhaps the largest leadership challenge in today's world, where we are bombarded with so much information and change, and constantly being told that there's this better way of doing things, or it should be like that, or we've got to fit in like this. I think that kind of sense of knowing who you are, what you stand for, and leading from that position in a system that will encourage you to go one way or another often, is perhaps the biggest challenge. Yeah,
and I wonder if that connects, because I've heard you talk before about the importance of your faith and of being part of the Quaker community. It's a very unique community. Does that influence your leadership style, the business choices that you make, being a Quaker? Is there a relationship between faith and leadership?
I hope so.
Yeah.
Would be my honest answer, and it is the main reason I've kept in touch with Quakerism over the years, which I was introduced to as a child and got a lot from for example, in my teenage years. And I think I often sort of take a bit of time to pause and think about, well, what has it given me? And I think, Quakerism has that ability. Quakers don't judge quickly. That ability to sit and to listen, to take in different viewpoints, the commitment to equality. It's testimony to equality. I often find Quakers are some of the people who are, most interested in listening to alternative perspectives and opinions, and prepared to consider them. And then the couple of the things that the belief that there is that of God, or I would translate it, there is something good in everyone. Now, I think, my life experience doesn't necessarily suggest that you can hold that completely strongly, but certainly, I would, in life, I'm always looking for, that person, what's the good in them? And how can I find that? How can I help them to bring that out? And be the best they can be, the best person they want to be. So I think that's been one thing, and I hope that the sort of Quaker belief in speaking truth to power is something that comes through in my work, and that I will hold on to at times.
Yeah. Wonderful. What a note to end on. Luke, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for the time this morning, Manus.